This is a painting of somebody who's getting phalange. And this is in fact extremely common method of torture. It's used in Central America, it's used in Asia, and so it's very common. And in fact, at RCT we have been doing a lot of research into these things. So you only have to beat for a certain amount of time, then in fact you can get problems which is chronicle, because under the soles they will be destroyed, so you will not be able to walk properly for the rest of your life. So
just the ankle.
And just to that the Convention Against Torture is also about cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment and punishment. And here it's again, which we see many different places of the world where you have detention centers or prisons where people are where there's overcrowding. What do we know about torture? It's only 2/3 of all the world countries which have ratified UNCAT. The prohibition of torture is absolute. It has come up several times, but it still remains. But officially, there's no country in the world saying it's okay with torture. And according to Amnesty International, it takes place in 111 out of 159 countries, and it's in 61 of them. Then there's impunity, and then it's about which is one of the severe problems, and that's why it's so much ignorance exists, and that is about the problem with reliable data on the prevalence of torture. It is not like that the governments or in the countries where torture is taking place, that they are very careful in having statistics on these issues. In fact, there are no data at all in relation to it, so it becomes, or there's no specific data on these things. And that's the challenge when you really would like to look into this. Then it is take place when people are deprived of liberty. Most torture take place within the first 48 hours. It is also a problem in rich and democratic countries, and one who is really studying. If you read the last issue of torture that Asian Human Rights Commission had just made, then there's an interview with Darius Rejali. He's Iranian American, and he has been doing a lot of studies on torture, and he's also showing the torture taking place also in democratic countries and rich countries. Under the wrong condition, most of us can become torturers, perpetrators, and that is to follow up on Mitra. He was mentioning it briefly, and he referred to the milligram study. And in fact, there's another study which is supporting it. It's Zimbardo's prison study. It's from Stanford. Oh, there's some Danish words into it, sorry. And what I have given here below, it's from, you can get it on the internet, one of the TED Talks, and it's made by Zimbardo. And Zimbardo's study it's about, he took some college graduate, where he took, some of them, they became prison wards, and the other one, they became prisoners. And those who were prisoners, it was young college students. Police cars came out, collected them in the middle-class neighborhood, drove them into a prison, and then they started with this, where some of them became prison guards and the other was prisoners. And they fell into the role so fast and to such an extent. So there was a woman who stopped Zimbardo saying, this study is going too far. It is unethical to continue this test anymore. And in fact, then the story was that the woman who stopped him later on became his wife. So, but you should see it because it's a very interesting presentation, and it's sometimes with researchers, they go so much into it, so when you see them talking enthusiastically about the research, then it's in fact also enthusiastically about torture, even though they really distance themselves from torture, but there's so much into it. And then it's about victims can become perpetrators and vice versa. And we see that many places in Africa where you have had civil wars, then they are taken by the government or the rebels, and then they are tortured, and then later on they are the one taking people in and become perpetrators. And you see to some extent also in some of the countries where the opposition is can become tortured, and there was somebody from, because one would believe that if you had been tortured, then in fact that you would be more resistant to say, okay, this is not going to happen to anybody else after this, but regrettably that's not the case. More facts, that's about, based on all our experiences, that it goes as it's a crucial system failure, and it commonly goes along with corruption, and then lack of faith in government and criminal justice system. And then it had come up many times, the poor and otherwise marginalized are by far overrepresented among the tortured. And then it's about Rejali again, where, because there was somebody saying, oh yeah, but in my country they're really using specialized in relation to the torture methods, and in fact these torture methods, they travel from country to country. So therefore you see many similarities, but of course also in some countries there's some specialities. I think that in some part in South Asia some fruits are being used when torture is taking place, or there can be some local difference, but there's a lot of similarities going on. Then people are tortured for different reasons, acquire information, blackmailing or intimidation of individuals, and then as a central tool in ordinary day-to-day police work. This is in fact taken from the front page of a newspaper in Bangladesh. This is a police station. Normally we connect torture with something really drastic. It's in a torture chamber, or you see something really with military, really rough. And here you can see from this office, here are 3 police officers, and here is one who is taken in for, they think he's a thief. And as you can see, it's a very quiet picture. This is another day in the office. And this is in fact, it's a very typical method for torture. It's called Palestinian hanging. Oh, it had different words in different countries. And I will come up to this later. But what it is about, it's a very quiet picture. It is a normal incident which take place. And then we shall remember that there we would like people to just to come in and knock on the door. Please come and help us. We have problems with criminals. And then it's another fact. It's about it is not everyone who has been tortured who needs specialized treatment. Some people, they have more resilience than other people, and there's a lot of studies now going on this, on the resilience factor. And it's also something which one is know, people who are very religiously or very politically of a very strong conviction. In fact, they are, want to find out that they are more resilient than others. Then it's about the consequences for the individual. There's psychological, physical sequelae, psychological, we heard some of it before, and then social consequences of torture for the individual. And then it's about, for some, torture might only have lasted for a very limited time, but the torture survivor is likely to be marked for life. Because it's also something about when really traumatic events is happening, there's also, as Mita was talking about, there's also some sort of an imprint which is taking place in the minds of people. So it will always be there. And then of course there can be some treatment methods where you learn not to think about or pass these sorts of memories. But Dr. Mitra, he knows much more about that than I do. Here it's about, I have in this picture again, it's about the physical, there can be chronic pain in limbs, joints, there can be secondary symptoms of stress conditions, psychosomatic, often is very interrelated, the psychological and the physical, and then functional impairment. And this is just this about the Palestinian hanging. I got some of our physiotherapists to talk a little about it, and you can, in fact, by this Palestinian hanging, you can get persistent chronic pain in shoulders and arms. That means you will keep with that forever. And it can be lancinating, stinging, burning, and cutting. So the person may get problems with regaining feelings in shoulders and arms. And that can also, because what else can happen is dislocation of the shoulders. And then, in fact, also what can happen is also the nerves can break. And in fact, then they can get some sort of just like pain, just like they get pain other places, or something like the phantom limb also in relation to this, because the nerves can be broken. So it is, this man may be hanging for some time, but it can have consequences for the rest of his life. And here is the psychological sequelae, and now I'm putting it a little bit different. That's about all the different symptoms which can be related to it. And then some of the diagnosis which also can be related to it. And you'll get a and the treatment can take a long time. At RCT, when we had some of the most hard-hit people who have been tortured, or they're really suffering, and they can go for treatment from half to a whole year. And it's not because then they are healed afterwards, but what we help them, it is in fact to live with the social consequences of torture for the individual. It's a loss of working and learning ability. We have found other studies showing people have very much, or they get difficulties in concentrating. And then, of course, when it relates to our countries, then they come to Denmark, and then it's very few people in the world who speak Danish, so they will have to learn Danish also. But they are already having difficulties, even more difficult than anybody else, in order to learn Danish. And Danish is not that an easy language for them to say. Then it's allowed a loss of status they can get after being tortured. They can be stigmatized. And then loss in trust in social institutions, in disintegration of family. It was some of the question also came up, resulting from execution or disappearance of family members or the torture. And in fact, there has been studies related to this also. There was a Norwegian, I don't know whether he was psychologist or psychiatrist, who made a study, and he talked about even the second generation is also affected what's happening. And then it's a social stigma and isolation, because they are suffering from the problems that they're having. And we came into it a little here in the morning. It's also about the effect in the family. You also have to imagine that if it's a person who have been severely tortured, then there are many who have problems in their sleep disturbance is a big problem, and then they easily suffering from the pain. So of course, in the family, then everyone have to we say in Danish that you have to take care of the person just like a rotten egg. That is about don't disturb it at all, because then dad will be very very upset. And then it's about if you are poor and then at the same time you have been tortured and then have difficulties in getting work afterwards, then it's about even more, so you're becoming even more marginalized. Then it's about the community level. Then it's about the disintegration. Torture creates an atmosphere of fear and terror that affects both the social and political life of the community. That's something that we have seen in Zimbabwe. where there was villages which didn't function because people were on the different sides of the conflict. So now, 20 years after, the village is not functioning. And in fact, in Sri Lanka, we have some similar experience in that way. There's a Sri Lankan who finished her PhD some years ago, who had made some studies where she has interviewed torture perpetrators in Sri Lanka, where she's also visited some of the villages. And again, these villages are dysfunctional because people do not talk to each other, because what had happened, they have been influenced, that people have been taken away, been tortured, disappeared, and the families are still there, and then the perpetrators, they are in the midst, and everyone knows about it. And then torture also as an instrument of ethnic suppression threatens the identity and culture and religious fabric. So it's also about the cohesion of a local community which is disrupted. When sometimes we would like a community to solve its own problem, then in some of these areas they are not capable of doing like that. Or you have to come in and do different activities to overcome this. Then it's something that we see in some places also. People, they have to fear. We are hearing about the Rohingyas in Burma who have to go to Bangladesh, and in Bangladesh they are throwing them out again. And but that people who are coming, going in exile, their problems is the exile thing is something add on to the other thing that they are suffering from. Then it's also about increased level of interpersonal violence, both politically and non-politically. It's again saying when violence is when the state is involved in violence, and violence is considered, this is a mean of action. So this is in fact people retract very fast to violence to solve conflicts. And here it is. And this is, I would argue that we can argue that. I'm trying, the discussion came up this this morning, where I try to distinguish between political motivated and non-political motivated. Of course, this is more for analytical reason, because in reality it is much more cross-cutting. It's not like that you accept, for instance, political motivated can also be in these times in the anti-terrorists, then in some place then in using torture, but it's only in the cases of relation to anti-terrorism. And what it is happening is this siphoning into other fields also. So, then it's about the non-political, and I'm putting it in inverted brackets because I know it is controversial to call it non-political, because it can be highly political, because it's certain groups who are targeted. And here I'm going down to, if you go down to standard operating procedure, I'm writing South Asia, and in fact in China and in India we know about, there was a study funded by the EU a couple of years ago, and the prevalence is extremely high in India. And then it's effects of torture. It has severe effects on many things. It's about decreased levels of political participation and level of genuine political competition. One thing, people will think twice or thrice before they enter politics, because they know it can be very, very risky, or if you air your voice. And it's also, in these areas, it's also increasing political polarization and sexual radicalization. That means you demonize the opponent. The opponent are not human. So that means also, and you call them terrible things, and then using these discourses, then also it's easy also to say, because they are not really one of you, they are not really human, then in fact you can also do non-human action against them, and or inhuman action against them. And torture is such an inhuman action. And state-sanctioned torture, it's not officially sanctioned, but it is when the state is not doing, is letting passing by, then it undermines the population's respect for legal authority, because it becomes very fast founded and on fear. People are scared to be critical, and then it's self-induced censorship, because you think twice and before you write something in the media or talk to journalists. It limits the civil society activity. It really demands of something of these people who are standing up. They have to be brave, courageous sometimes, more often than. It's again saying, in my country, it's very easy to work in that way. The worst which can happen is in fact that we lose our money from the government and I'm sacked, and then I'll have to find, in fact, another job. But in other places, in some countries in Asia, it is, in fact, it can be the life, it can be the family, it can be the job, it can be, yeah, many things which is. And then it undermines, we heard about that, undermines the rule of law. If there's no proper independent media, if there's no strong civil society, then there's also less checks and balances. And then, as I told you, if permitted in one field, it permeates into other fields. Torture is also causing economic inefficiency, because it relates to the general mistrust. It increases the economists, they call it transaction cost. In order to have trade and have interaction, it costs more, because in these countries you don't trust each other, you need more control, you need more enforcement. And even though you get this more control and more enforcement, then it's still not enough. And in fact, there's, this is related also, there's a concept which came in 20 years ago in economy, which was called social capital. And one of the most important things in the social capital is in fact trust. It's again, it was the economists, they said, how can we explain that some countries are doing well, even though they don't have, how to say, the natural resources that other countries have, even though they may not have the human resources that other countries have, but they are succeeding very well. And then they found out this missing link with social capital to explain that there must be something else. And one of the things that is that in some countries, then there is a big high trust. So you anticipate always that in fact people are going to do what they intend, what they were supposed to do. While in other countries you will never anticipate that they're going to do. You have to control first before trusting. So that means that you will have to invest much less in, for instance, in control mechanisms and in institutions involved in this. And then you lose for the individual and society, as the torture survivor may have reduced their working capacity. And in that way it also aggravates poverty and underdevelopment. And then it's again, and by having these people who are in need, in fact, of treatment, then it's also a burden of the healthcare system. It's also because they come, and often they don't relate it, even in Denmark, they don't relate it to the torture situation. Then they come, they cannot sleep, and then the general protector will give them something to sleep, but then there's so many different things related at the same time. When it's about treatment of torture survivors, it's never only about only one thing. And then it exacerbates already existing inequalities, making the poor poorer. It undermines the moral authority and credibility, internal and external, of the state institutions. And here I would like to talk just briefly about the police. It is, in fact, in my own country, it is one of the professions, if not the profession which has the highest, it's one of the two highest who are the trust, where people have the most trust is, that's in fact in the Danish police. And that means also that in fact for the Danish police, it also, they really can rely on the public, because if something happen and people they see something wrong and they need the police, then they'll contact the police and they will not fear that the police will do any misdeeds. In the same studies, and the police year after year came out in the top. I have to admit, I'm not happy to admit it in this forum, but the politicians, they fare very, very low. So I think that sometimes in many countries it is like we need the politicians, they do a very good work, but then the population also became very fast to become disappointed, because for a politician it's also about it's a far of getting solution, and then you have to bargain and things like that. And yeah, so lowers the population trust in state institution, and it's not only in that, it's the same also with taxation. Why pay taxes? Because everyone is cheating, and so it's this. And I just told you about fear of providing police with information. And it's again, for the Danish police, when we had, when after 9/11, when there was a discussion about, oh, just like in all other countries, then in fact, it was very important that the different governments came up with the new laws due to the new situation. And then, in fact, some of this law was very draconic. Even the Danish police, they found it very draconic, saying, we don't need this, these instruments. The instruments we have at our hand is sufficient. And then, at the same time, top-level police is all saying, please, please, you put too much trust on us. We're just human beings. So it's again the belief or the thinking that it's again, if people or institutions are giving too much power, then eventually it will corrupt and they will be misused. So it's again having these checks and balances is very important. And I'm very proud. See, I come from a human rights organization, and now I'm talking about the Danish police. That doesn't mean that we can criticize the Danish police, because if there's something, then we will come and do it.